Hello guys and welcome back to the client case study series. Today we're going to be talking about Andre. So Andre is a very interesting example for a few different reasons. Number one, he is the first person I ever coached all the way through to a natural bodybuilding stage. Number two, the majority of his visual transformation, which is pretty impressive, was achieved through gaining muscle mass rather than just losing body fat. And the majority of transformations that you see online, or even from this series for myself, a lot of the change that you see, the more dramatic ones are often achieved through revealing muscle mass that was already there underneath loads of body fat. Andre was absolutely not in this case. And it's also a really interesting example because he went from, as quickly as I think it is possible to go, someone that looked like he barely lifted, to someone that had a very high level natural bodybuilding competitor level physique in an incredibly short period of time, literally a couple of years. So this one is a little bit of a throwback. I first got to know Andre in the immediate, I think, post-COVID period it was. So essentially we've been chatting to each other at the gym where I coached, and he basically told me, look mate, I've been training for years and years. I'm trying to balance playing like five-a-side football with like my weight training, and I've been very consistent with it for many years, but I basically lack direction. I feel like my physique just does not represent the effort that I put in over all of these years. I gave him a few pointers, things to focus on, sort of explained how to, attack each set with a little bit more accuracy, talked him through sort of some basic periodization structures. He went away, implemented those, they worked really well for him, and then he came back to me and was like, oh, actually, I'm getting married. Would you mind getting me into shape for my wedding? So that was when we first started working together. So when we first started, look, he'd just started implementing things I discussed, but this was his start point. Like, he didn't have a lot of muscle, he wasn't particularly lean, he had a decent sort of like skeletal structure, as we later find out, but he didn't have a huge amount to show for what he'd been working with. So we basically got into a bit of a deep dive with his training approach, really looked at how he sort of like set things up relative to the needs of his physique, got him sort of comfortably losing body fat, and we got him into fantastic shape for his wedding and his honeymoon. When we got to that point, then we had a look at his physique and he was like, look, I'd like to continue this process. I want to now focus on building some muscle. So we sort of sat down, we looked at the needs of his physique. At that point, his main weakness was really his back. As he dieted down for the wedding, we'd found that actually, he had a really nice and very responsive physique. Once he started actually, applying a bit more intensity and a bit more like long-term progression to his training, rather than just going in and doing, a split, a chest day, a back day, whatever. He was following a program that built week to week to week. We actually found that even during that initial fat loss phase, he lost quite a lot of body fat, but he gained a fair amount of muscle. So when we transitioned into that first gaining phase, we really saw like the muscle mass growth go into like absolute overdrive, and he gained more muscle in that period than almost anyone I'd ever worked with at that time, and stayed in actually relatively good nick as we pushed him up from a low point after that first diet of 78.8 kilos, and we pushed him all the way up over the course of about a year up to almost 92 kgs. So even at 92 kgs, he had a relatively decent body composition, and we were there saying, look, we're going to maximize the amount of growth on your physique. We feel like this is what you've missed out on. Aside from a lot of issues with your sort of like approach to training previously, you didn't really have much direction. You weren't sort of getting the most out of your exercise setups, executions, intensities, this type of thing. He didn't really know what movements worked for his physique. When we started to implement all of those things, his body really responded, and he grew a shitload of muscle in that gaining phase, all the way up from almost 79 to all the way up to nearly 92 kgs, still in decent nick. And as we were getting towards the end of that gaining phase, he started saying to me, look, I'm really interested in potentially doing a natural bodybuilding show. Do you think this is something that I could do? And at this stage, I'd always wanted to coach people through natural bodybuilding, and I'd already been a coach for a long time, but I'd never found the right person to do that first prep as a coach with. I had lots of friends that did it. I'd done courses on prepping people for competition. I'd read every book there was available. I'd researched it hugely. I'd practiced my systems with, photo shoot clients, that type of thing. So I pretty much knew what I was doing. I was very aware of it, but I'd never actually taken someone all the way there. So Andre was an ideal person to start with. He was a very sort of relaxed guy to coach, didn't sort of overstress things. And he was also someone that would just do what he was told, which was very, very sort of like stress-free to coach, as it were. A really chilled out, relaxed guy. And that's basically, exactly what you need in that environment. You want someone that's going to do the work, but you don't want someone that's going to overstress and make it more difficult for themselves than it needs to be. Because, as we'll later find out, there were plenty of stressful things that occurred throughout this prep for him. But we said, you know what? Let's give it a go. Let's go for this first bodybuilding prep. So I very carefully sort of like mapped out which show would suit him best relative to sort of where he was starting from, all these type of things. We picked one in our hometown, Birmingham, and it was going to be the BMBF Birmingham or Midlands show. And he wanted to compete in the novice category, which is pretty much the most competitive in terms of number of entries every year for any competition. Everyone does one show and then buggers off. But yeah, the novice category is always a massive, massive class. So we lined everything up for him, and we basically got him, steadily losing body weight. We'd got him to a great position from a muscle symmetry perspective at the start of that prep. So we'd identified back as the main area that needed to come up over the course of that off season. So we really doubled down his back training volume, his execution of those movements, find out what he connected well, what he didn't with. We had a few injuries to navigate from previous stuff, but we got those well under control. And his back really responded to the point where we started that prep in a near ideal position. Okay, he probably had a touch more weight to lose than would have been ideal, starting off. But we managed things really nice from a timeline perspective, gave ourselves plenty of time to get there. And we managed to do it in a relatively stress-free way, especially when you consider that he was awaiting his first kid. So his child was born, I think, days after his show. So he was actually invited to the British finals after this show, but elected not to do it on the fact that he then had a baby to look after, which is fair enough. And I think his missus was extremely tolerant of everything that goes with it. But he was also just incredibly good at compartmentalizing what he was doing without putting stress onto his wife. He was driving to go pick up his wife takeaways to satiate her cravings, not having any for himself. So did a fantastic job of navigating, like being a good other half whilst also prepping for a bodybuilding show. So that was really, really cool to see. So we got him sort of steadily leaner and leaner. We had to push him fairly hard at the end, but it came very clear that he had created an unbelievably good physique. And I think sort of it can't be underestimated how quickly he went from looking like he'd never really been to the gym before to looking in unbelievable shape inside about 2 years. So he got from point A to point B in such an effective manner. Diet phase, tidy everything up, see what you're working with, bring up the weak points during that longer gaining phase, diet back down, and absolutely nailed his first show. And to be honest, as it was the first person that I was prepping, I made sure that I basically just did an over-the-top job of helping from an adherence perspective. So Andre and I actually spoke every single day for 18 weeks in the run-up to his show. Just spat everywhere there. Just to make sure that we were basically, dotting every I, make sure fully adherent to the diet, body weight was doing what we wanted, just to make sure that we left nothing to chance. Obviously I was almost like over-coaching him probably, looking back now, because I wanted to make sure that, we got what we were coming for. And that's the interesting thing about coaching for a competition versus coaching for, a lifestyle transformation. When you're coaching someone just to get them into great shape and then hold it, there's no real sort of like timelines. They might have a holiday or something like that, but that's not the reason they're doing it. Whereas when you are coaching someone for a bodybuilding show, if your timings are out as a coach, their hard work is wasted. If you use the wrong peaking strategy and they wake up and they're looking spilled or flat or whatever, their hard work is wasted. So you have got, the huge time and financial investment that the client has made when you, as a coach, take someone to stage. So I remember, being pretty much as nervous as they were prior to them stepping on stage. I say they for a reason, which I'll reveal in a sec. But also sort of, it was my first experience of the massive satisfaction you get of someone that you've coached, taken through that process, and the emotional buy-in that you have with them to actually see them succeed on that stage, and the amount of emotion that goes with it from them and their family. It was an eye-opener for me what an addictive and enjoyable experience it is, helping someone bring their best for a finite day. And it feels like the best test of your ability as a coach, to land it on a certain day, the best they've ever looked, and make sure that they are competitive. So ultimately it ended up being a fantastic day. Andre actually placed 4th out of I think 14 in the novice category, and it was an unbelievably competitive one. We'd only ever gone in with the expectation of just hoping to get a place. We were well aware of the fact that he would have been, had spent less time seriously training than anyone else really. He had only been at that level of muscularity recently. We'd grown and then dieted down. So we were never expected to come in and smoke everyone, but he worked really hard to bring a fantastic level of condition, worked hard with his posing, and he brought a really good lean symmetrical physique. His feedback was that he was one of the leanest guys in the show, which was so good to hear from both, a personal perspective as his coach and also as his friend, and nice to see him do so well. I say one off because this photo here is a really cool photo actually. So this also shows Emma, who's been mentioned earlier in the series, who came to spectate, Kate, who is now absolutely smashing it as a Bullfit coach, and Ant Taylor, who is still a client and is a WNBF pro these days. This was also his first show, and I would say he was easily the leanest person in that show. Absolutely crushed it on his first day. I will do one of these videos on him in the near future as well. And this photo was actually taken by Nick. So we had the whole Bullfit coaching team there years before they actually came on board as coaches. So it's a really cool memory and a really, really enjoyable experience coaching Andre from that point where he didn't really know what he was doing in the gym, had no direction, and was just wasting hours of his week aimlessly moving weights around, never seeing any progression, to teaching him those principles of how to effectively lose body fat, getting into great shape for his wedding, which obviously in itself a huge achievement, then teaching him how to actually maximize muscle growth. And that's a really satisfying feeling when you take someone that has trained for a decade and hasn't really built as much muscle as they should have done, to be able to transform their results. You've got no low-hanging fruit. You're not just teaching them weights for the first time and getting them to eat a high-protein diet. You have to really bring something to the party that makes a difference. So it's a nice feeling to really change someone from a muscularity perspective rather than just teach them calorie balance, how to stick to it, and then teaching him to get shredded at the end. So overall, his transformation, he started off at the low 80 kgs, dieted down, I think 84, dieted down to about 78 for his wedding, bulked all the way up to 92, and then cut all the way down with a stage weight of 77, looking incredibly well conditioned on stage and absolutely nailed that peaking process. So overall, a really, really enjoyable experience and a really cool first entry to the natural bodybuilding world for me as a coach. And then since then, Andre and I have kept in basically constant contact. He speaks most months about his progress, that type of thing. We have goals to get him back on stage in future once he gets a window in his life where pumping out children allows him to get back on stage without it disrupting too much. But I think that's what natural bodybuilding is all about. It's about testing yourself for a given date, bring the absolute best you can, going away, making improvements, and then stepping back on stage vastly improved. And I'm really confident that he will do that when he eventually steps back on stage. And he's someone that I'm very, very proud to have played a big role in his development as a natural bodybuilding athlete.